We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we have a real underachiever on our podcast. It's Charlie Kirk. Okay.
Hi, Congressman. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, man. Good to see you. So I say underachiever. Of course, that's not true. At age 26, you're the author of 3 books. One just came out, the Magga Doctrine. That was released
moderately pro-Trump group.
What's that about? And then that was released in March. You've already been 30 under 30. That was at 2018. So you were 24.
Yeah,
I guess when you were 30 under 30. That's pretty insane. And you're the host of the Charlie Kirk Show, of course. But I think most significantly, what everybody knows you for is you founded Turning Point USA at age 18. So. I mean, I really want to get into that because what 18-year-old is thinking about founding such an impressive movement? I mean, what did you envision back then? What sparked that idea? And what? It's just not what we're thinking of usually when we're teenagers. Mm-hmm. So, why were you so dead set on this? How did this even happen?
Well, I wish I could take credit for this, and that I had the whole vision perfectly articulated. Anyone who starts a business or starts an enterprise will tell you that it's very messy along the way. You just follow something that you have a talent and a little bit of a passion for, and you just kind of learn along the way. I wanted to go to West Point, didn't get in.
Yeah.
Unlike you.
I didn't get in the Naval Academy.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
No,
rejected.
I did not know that. you made up for that.
Made it.
Making the SEALs. Many people that go to the Naval Academy could never do what you did. So then I started this organization after my rejection from West Point by convincing my parents, hey, I'm going to take 6 months off before I go to college, kind of a gap year deal. Start Turning Point USA. That was the idea I literally had written on a piece of paper with no money, no connections, and no idea what I was doing. I just felt that young conservatives are not being serviced properly.
The word turning point is a pretty cool, it's a good phrase, I think. So how did you come up with that?
It was actually my father.
Really?
My father called me up. I said, hey, I want to start this organization. And he said, well, here are a couple draft names because you need a name.
Yeah.
Right? And names are tricky things with businesses.
Yeah.
Anyone who finds names that we all consider to be household names, they have all different stories. And
yeah.
Apple came because they went in the words that were the most appealing to people.
Right.
It was like the second most.
Right.
But my father was like, how about this one, and he said Turning Point. I was like, that's it. We need a turning point in our country.
When it clicks, it clicks.
It meshed.
Yeah.
And so it's just as relevant today as it was in 2012, which is we're in a generational turning point for our country. We can go a variety of different ways. If you look at the Turning Point logo, there's a lot to it. It's going from left to right. It's going from blue to red.
Right.
There's a lot of kind of
there's a lot of hidden
unspoken,
innuendo.
Yeah, kind of like the FedEx logo, where if you can find the arrow in it between the E and the X.
Wait, there's an arrow between.
You've never heard of this?
Okay.
Congressman, I have to show you the FedEx logo.
Pause the recording right now while we look at this.
Between E and X, there's literally an arrow that's pointing.
Really?
Yeah, it's
pointing at
FedEx.
what, like the future, the destination?
Yeah, pointing the destination because it's on its way.
So this is 2012.
That's right.
So is this off the heels of the Tea Party movement? Was that very influential to you?
Yeah, it definitely was. I would go to Tea Party rallies. I actually would speak at some Tea Party meetings as a senior in high school as the guy that was really worried about rising debts and deficits, and I share that concern today as I did back then. I joke around. I say back then I was warning old Tea Party goers, and the exact type of individual I'm talking about, that just love their country. They literally wear T-shirts that have the U.S. Constitution on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're giving out the pocket constitutions.
Yep.
And I was saying, hey, this $12 trillion debt is going to break our country's back. We got to stop it. We're at $26 trillion today, 8 years later.
Yeah, we just added a couple more.
Try like 3 or 4 more trillion.
And so I would like to think that the debt would be one of our most compelling arguments to young people for more limited government, and I think a different understanding of what government is for. I deal with a lot of young people, of course, but I've been in politics really a fraction of the time that you have. Do you think it's compelling? Do you think it's working?
Not as much as it should be.
Yeah.
It should be the issue that gets young people marching in the streets.
Right.
There's a lot of adults that have tried to start movements like that. Let's get young people to stand up for the money they're spending. Mm-hmm. It's way too cerebral. It's way too distant.
Well, you know what happens instead, it seems like? And there was a good article written by, I think it was a Harvard professor. I think it was Ed Glazer who wrote this one. I hope I'm not wrong about that, because then I just totally misquoted it. But it's basically, it was this. It was boomer socialism has led to this, I think, this millennial and Gen Z obsession with socialism. But it's more of a politics of resentment than anything else. Basically, boomers were able to vote themselves into policy, lots of entitlements in the forms of, Medicare, Social Security, ever-growing entitlements that if we're concerned about our debt, these are the true things driving the debt. There's just no question about that, mathematically speaking. Also, a coronavirus every once in a while that also drives our debt, but it's it's more understandable. This is created instead of young people rising up and saying, "Hey, these programs are making me go broke, and no, I don't want to raise my taxes to keep paying for increasing benefits here." Instead, they're saying, "Well, they get benefits, I want benefits too, so I want all the free stuff."
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Well, look, and I talk about this a lot, which is, it's not an excuse to say, give me free stuff. It's not an excuse to play victim. But young people really are getting screwed right now in the policy ladder.
There's legitimate complaints.
There's a legit, and again, I'm super careful not to do the AOC thing, which is like, everyone before us has done nothing but mistakes.
Right.
That's foolish
and
wrong.
What did she say? Like, my generation has never known prosperity. I mean, she literally, what a tone-deaf thing to say.
And I don't believe that at all. But equally, I will admit, though, that there has been a series of generational betrayals that have happened out of the halls of Congress. And I'm not looping you into that, but if you look at the debt,
I just got there. I
know. You look at the debt, the deficits, the deterioration of the currency, the enrichment of the ruling class, the protection of the kingdom of D.C., the entire student loan industry is built around the federal government's over-intrusion into the cartel of the colleges. So young people have very little equity. In fact, they have more debt than they have assets. A lot of young people. So you look at a 26-year-old who probably owes more money than has any sort of value. They can't find a really high-paying job because they probably studied something silly in college that they were told.
There's an element of personal responsibility there,
and so,
which I think AOC and those types leave out
completely. Dismiss. Yeah. Right. And so I admit that that's a huge part of the formula. However, I don't dismiss the fact that young people are banging the table right now, or even conservative young people, because they do feel a little bit disenfranchised. They do feel, and there is some merit to that. To completely dismiss it and just say, totally, well, just work harder and you do that. I agree with that. That's right. But also to not address some of the policy missteps, I think, is also a mistake. So to kind of complete the point with what you talk about the national debt, it is the greatest national security risk. Debt is the slavery of the free. Every single, I think, independent free thinker the last 300 years has warned us that a massive debt and deficit will infringe upon freedoms and liberties of the current and the future. It destroys the currency, and when you have hyperinflation, which will ensue when you're creating money, and we can't even print money as quickly as we're creating it. We literally can't physically print on the printing presses as quickly as we're creating it. You're going to see middle-class workers and lower-class individuals hurt the most. Because people that own land, that own securities, that are in the market, they're going to be fine. Like an 8% hyperinflation scenario, they'll be able to continue to produce their own income at an equal or greater rate. But it's the people in the middle and the lower end that will be screwed by that. And so, look, I am a deficit and debt hawk. I remain one. I always have been. I feel as if there's not many of us anymore.
Well, it's like, how do we convince? I mean, one way I try to frame it in policy when I am trying to persuade a group of young people that, like, listen, you've got to be concerned about the debt. And they'll say, yeah, I'm concerned. Okay, sure. But I'm like, yeah, but you're not voting that way. And and they'll say, well, Republicans don't care about debt either. I mean, look at the evidence. And I'll say, well, that's true. Now
I get that argument all the time.
But there's deeper political reasons for that. It's not as if Republicans have been totally in charge really at any given point. And there is still a balance of power that occurs, and it's not quite what people think. But putting that aside, I try to point out a really specific policy. Like, look, we want Social Security reform to look like this. Doesn't mean, and God, just for the record, I always have to say this, we can reform Social Security and not touch current benefits for seniors. Yeah. We can put it on a more sustainable track, and we will not take away your Social Security. But we do have to change the way that it grows. We have to change the way that we measure
retirement age, contribution limits, all that stuff.
So the retirement age, like this is what I say too. That's what young people have to give up. Okay, so if we're going to give up part of our pie, it's retirement age. I don't need to retire at age 67. I should retire later, in accordance with what is going to be closer to my actual lifespan. But do not raise my taxes, because I'll tell you what, and young people need to know this. This is the Democrats' plan that they all rally behind. It's called Social Security 2100. This is their plan to get Social Security solvent. They increase benefits for everybody, no matter how rich you are of a retiree. They increase those benefits, and then they increase the payroll tax, and they remove any cap on the payroll tax.
Yeah, and look, I'm not planning to run for office, and so I don't have to dance around it. I don't think our generation should be forced to pay for Social Security. I think we should be able to opt out. I think it is thievery. It's highway robbery what's happening to our generation. The money's not there. There's no Social Security lockbox. Yeah. We borrow in and out of it.
It's a transfer of wealth from the young to the old.
Yeah, and so
it's always what it's been.
As a 26-year-old that employs, a couple hundred people in their 20s and 30s, I see their FICA contributions.
They're enormous.
And they're never going to see that.
Yeah.
It will be that contribution will be deteriorated through inflation. And that money could easily be put into a very simple money market account, very, very cautious, money manager account. And so I go a step further and say, why do we have to participate in this?
Yeah.
And I know that's radical and you don't have to comment on it. And again, I'm able to say that because I don't have to get a call from a constituent, right?
And the simple answer to that is because if we didn't, all of a sudden the trust fund would be completely depleted.
I fully recognize that.
It wouldn't. But for the audience, I mean, just so that then seniors wouldn't be getting any.
I recognize the funding, issues it would cause. I'm talking more morally.
Yeah. Oh, well, true. Yes. I mean, here's the other frustrating part: is in the early 2000s, Bush tried to. There was a big movement. Now, it happened right after Katrina, and so it just wasn't the politically right time to do it.
Deaf ears.
But what you're talking about is personal retirement accounts, which is, or at least
Chile did it really successfully.
At least we want some of our money from FICA going into a personal retirement account. Just a portion of it. And there's really well thought out strategies to do this.
Al Gore ran on this.
The problem is, Al Gore, I didn't actually know that.
He ran on it in 2000. You lockbox, you can lock it up. Sorry.
I didn't actually know that's what he meant by the lockbox.
Yeah,
we always just make fun of him for the lockbox.
The lockbox was his Social Security. Like, we're going to put it in the lockbox and no one's going to touch it. Like, I agree with you.
Yeah, I want to watch it grow. I want to, maybe have some limited control about where it gets invested. Just watch it. It's mine.
Yeah.
And like that seems pretty obvious. That's what your 401k is.
But why can't we trust people to plan for their own retirements? I don't. I know this might be
because we told them they didn't have to.
That's exactly right. Is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt created this in 1935, and we haven't raised the retirement age since, and now we have deteriorated anyone trying to do intergenerational planning. And by the deterioration of our currency and by inflating the money supply, we don't actually encourage saving. But that's a deeper conversation.
Yeah, but it is the conversation, and so focusing on again. The minds of young people. I mean, and what they think about and what they care about. What else? So the debt's obviously a big one. And
they should, but
eventually,
they don't.
Eventually, we're going to get to that.
I'm going to be honest,
we're going to be
a lot of young people don't care about that, but they should.
They should. And you and I are always trying to figure out how to persuade them that they should more. And what else do they care about? I mean, what if you take an apolitical student that you interact with, not too conservative, not the type who goes to Turning Point events, but also not the type who protests you at things either. Just like what's on their minds?
They feel like they're getting screwed.
Yeah, but and how much of that is true, and how much of
again, you and I might not totally agree on this. I think a lot of it is true. I think the political class is making decisions that are disenfranchising them. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that has commonality and agreement, and this might be populist, this might be, outside of just traditional conservative technocratic thinking, is that a lot of the decisions made by the ruling class over the last couple decades have actually been at the price, and the cost has been young people not being as societally, in a good place or advantage. So when I talk to just like an apolitical person, I say, do you trust politicians? Absolutely not. Do you trust DC? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Do you think that they're serving your best interests? Absolutely not. So that's kind of a really interesting starting point.
Yeah.
I will say, to kind of say other issues that I have even, become more vocal on, and issues that I have, especially because of coronavirus, I've really ratcheted down on, which is immigration. Young people, especially young tech graduates, are saying, why would we import more foreign workers right now?
Right.
While we have 27 million people that are out of work.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is an interesting data point. I'm assuming they also ask about things like, in my surveys that I'll do, environment's way up there.
It's top 3 for young people.
Yeah.
Top 3.
And the question is always, and I think this is a thing that we as conservatives have to engage in a lot more. You talk about this in your book, the Magga Doctrine. Is it MAGA or MAGA? How do you pronounce it?
We've had this huge debate.
This is important.
So it is like magazine, MAGA.
MAGA?
Like
I don't know. I'm more of a MAGA. if I'm going to say
I had this whole debate with Adam Carolla. He's like, "Are you sure it's not Magga?" So like,
I mean, yeah,
like Krav Maga.
It's not like Spanish that has what we call, I don't know what, I guess an apostrophe, but it's called a tilde in Spanish. And so that tells you where the accent goes.
Sure.
So we need to put accents
I don't think that if you put an accent on MAGA, it would resonate well with the Trump base.
Yeah, it'd freak people out.
I don't know. Too many.
All right. But anyway, you do talk about energy independence in the book there.
I do, yes.
I've talked about energy independence a lot. I am currently freaking out because I'm very worried about our oil and gas sector. And it's not it does not elicit a lot of sympathy from basically anybody who's moderate or left, and so it's only conservatives that even think about defending it. I think I have a great set of arguments for defending the oil and gas industry. I think we need to promote those arguments more and more. Again, we have ceded too much ground as conservatives on energy and environment, just in general.
I agree.
We have to engage in those debates.
They're
and talk
fundamental.
about how to protect the environment, but also protect people's livelihoods and our energy sources. This shouldn't be all that hard to do, but there's been a lot of dogmatism invested. So how do you talk about it in your book?
Well, I talk, first and foremost, I say it's one of President Trump's most significant accomplishments. Now, mind you, this is before the coronavirus and the demand shock, and also international actors that are dumping oil into our country at record rates that we've never seen before. And I'm talking about Saudi Arabia that has 7 times increase of dumping crude oil into our country. So I preface it with that. Yeah. But prior to that, President Trump liberating the hydraulic fracking industry, deregulating, not having the Federal Trade Commission or all the different agencies, whether it be on the financial instrument side or on the regulatory side or the mineral side or Department of Interior, going after these amazing producers. And look, there's a really bad rap for oil and natural gas development in our country, and it's completely unwarranted. A lot of people that don't understand it think that, you just strike oil and you become rich. It's so complex. There's so much risk involved that a lot of producers don't make it. You have to lease land. You have to have production. You have to get a purchaser. You have to monitor the price of oil. There's intergenerational companies right now that are being put at risk because of all these different elements.
Right.
And if you look at a 30-year span of oil and natural gas, about 8 years have been good for the producers. Yeah. About 22 have been really volatile, if not right at risk. And we have penalized any sort of private equity, pension funds from investing in them. The capital sources have dried up. So here's where let's just start with this. I talk about it in my book as one of the most significant policy achievements of any president in American history because we used to be so reliant on Middle Eastern oil.
Yeah.
We used to be reliant on the Saudis, reliant on the Iranians, reliant on the entire Middle Eastern power complex, whether it be or Russia in general. And President Trump, because of the lifting of the oil export ban, said, go nuts. Let's be number one. And we did. We were number one prior to Corona. That means, I think, less foreign entanglements overseas in the Middle East that I think have needlessly put a lot of our interests in jeopardy.
That happened before him, though, the export ban.
No, I'm saying Obama lifted it.
Yeah.
But as a byproduct of that, it was a Republican Congress.
No, I mean, Trump is certainly
they got it done in an omnibus,
and
they basically put Obama in a corner, and they're like, if you want us to say yes to all your social programs, you got to lift the oil export ban, and Obama did it. It was 2014. It was actually the Houston congressman that was in peril that got in a lot of trouble for that scandal. Actually, he was the one that pioneered it.
Who was that?
He had a picture scandal or something.
He
was the one that actually got it done.
Going even further back, there was like the whole shale revolution happened because of some very, I guess, obscure language put into the way we're allowed to frack, and it just it basically put it under some different kind of basically state guidelines as opposed to federal, and just unleashed. I mean, not only an energy boon and energy independence, but a massive reduction in carbon emissions.
Well, that's what no one talks about, right? And so natural gas is directly correlated with oil. And so you can separate the two, but natural gas is like the carbonation out of a Coca-Cola, right? It comes out when you strike oil. We have more natural gas than any other country in the world. It's not even close. And states like New York that are run by bitter tyrant Marxists like Andrew Cuomo, he would rather build casinos and get his citizenry addicted to indulgences, and I'm not a huge fan of building casinos in rural New York, than opening up his portion of the Marcellus Shale, which could fund schools, roads, and bridges.
Or at least allowing us to build pipelines so that we can
Precisely.
give him some U.S. natural gas. And Boston does the same thing. They like to import Russian natural gas.
Yeah, but to your point, it's more energy. It's more environmentally friendly, and that's why we've seen carbon emissions go down, because natural gas, by its carbon emissions, is so much lower than traditional coal-fired power factories.
It's a mouthful. I don't like saying it.
You know exactly the phrase I'm trying to say.
Coal power, just coal power.
Coal power factories. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's always been kind of a tongue twister. And so we as conservatives have done an awful job talking about the attributes and the necessity of being energy dominant.
Because too often I think conservatives just say, well, jobs. And that's important, but it doesn't resonate with people as an argument because the left will just say, no, they'll have new jobs. Oh, yeah, just like that?
It's also not economic. It's also not philosophically, economically, or argumentally sound for us. Yeah. Because we argue for creative destruction all the time.
Right.
And so if we were to say, for example, we say, oh, well, it's a great thing that certain jobs are disenfranchised. Look at all the taxi cab drivers. We have Uber. Things are better. Right. And all of a sudden with this industry, we say, well, just protect the jobs. That's important. I'm not minimizing it. But the industry as a whole is so critical to the well-being of our country that it supersedes even the employment aspect.
And this gets to another conversation about a more kind of libertarian economic mindset versus a more of an industrial policy mindset. I've had Oren Cass on my podcast to talk about that. And it seems to me that the Magga Doctrine, or however you pronounce it, would be a little bit more along the lines of the industrial policy mindset because Trump himself. So in your book, do you address that and how?
Yes and no. I'm happy to dive into it.
Yeah.
So to kind of tell you the guiding philosophy of the Magga Doctrine and the philosophy I have, I think we're a country with an economy in it. We're not an economy that happens to be in a country. Mm-hmm. So I think the nation's best interests need to supersede whatever capitalistic ideals there are. Now, I'm a capitalist and I'm a free market person because I think it's best for the country.
Yeah.
With certain aspects and certain things, I think, no, there are certain industries worth absolutely protecting. Who cares if it costs us more?
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical production, vitamin C production.
We're having that debate right now on supply chains.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't care if pharmaceuticals go up a little bit if that means it's made in America. Because I don't want the Chinese Communist Party tyrants to ever be able to interrupt our supply chain. I don't want them making money off of it. Yeah. And so that's where I would resonate with Oren Cass on that. And I think steel could be very similar. I think auto manufacturing. Now, when it comes to things that are less critical, like textiles, okay, if you absolutely need to make that in Laos, Cambodia, or Vietnam, that's your own choice. I'd prefer you to make it in America, and my own personal consumer choice will be that. But I think this strict libertarian dogma, of which I used to entertain many years ago.
I think we all did because we kind of grew up in Economics 101.
Yeah, exactly.
With comparative advantage.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia can make $2 barrel oil, so you just have to buy it there. Well, do you though?
That's such an important point.
Maybe we shouldn't. And because my thinking has also sort of evolved on this, and we do have to find the balance, and it's hard to find the exact balance. I think, Oren Cass, he's gotten into a lot of like spats with a lot of more libertarian thinking, smart guys, smart people, and but when I look at Oren's actual solutions, they're I think they're much less controversial. It's more along the lines of, hey, we need to have a better. We need to close the skills gap, right? Like we need to actually get people trained up for these things. No, of course, and it's things we would all agree on. But because it is much more complicated to move from the philosophy of an industrial policy to the actual nuts and bolts of figuring out what policy will work for a specific industry. It's hard. We're trying to figure. It's going to be different for the energy industry. It's going to be different for medical supply chains. It's going to be different for everything. And so but it's good that we're at least entertaining the conversation.
Well, look, and we've done it with other things in the past, though. And so to act as if we don't have a blueprint would not be true. Yeah. We did it with Boeing. There's only two companies in the world that can build what Boeing builds. Right. Boeing and Airbus. That's it. Right. I mean, there's only two companies in the world that can build. Now, China's trying to build a third competitor, of course. We build our own missiles. We build our own ammunition.
Right.
And whether we protected it or we prioritized that, you could use whatever language you want. But I think it's a really good thing, Dan, that the Chinese Communist Party isn't making our Tomahawk missiles.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing.
Right, yeah. but the libertarian absolutists would say, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
They can make it less.
If it's cheaper, it's cheaper.
Let's go make our Abrams tanks over there. Right. Let's go make – and that's silly because I actually think that vitamin C and pharmaceuticals, you can make the argument, are equally as critical. Maybe not vitamin C, but there's still an element of that, are equally as critical to the well-being of the country as a Tomahawk missile.
Right. I agree. moving on, you've said sometimes that you have some populist inclinations, and I want to ask what that means, because I'm always trying to identify the actual definition of populism and what people mean by it. So what does it mean to you? Why is it a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a great question. I think that there's positives and negatives to populism. I think populism has brought us forth wonderful things in our country's history and awful things. Populism is listening to the people. Mm-hmm. That's first and foremost. I think the founding fathers, and again, it's if you label me, you negate me. That's a very old quote, right? Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, and the apostrophe and the label that it might put me in the corner of the listener of this right now, being a populist generally in today's time means that you believe that there is a group of experts and elites that have gotten way more wrong than they have gotten right. And that the American people's gut instinct of what they're seeing happening in real time actually is a much better compass and a roadmap of where to go forward than this group of very confident yet constantly wrong elites in even the national security space, the international commerce space, the political class space, that seem to continue to want to take the same step and repeat. And so are there potential negatives of populism? Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, when I see Elizabeth Warren saying, I'm a socialist populist, let's get Medicare for all, it terrifies me.
Right. Well, because there's a left and kind of a right populism. They're both kind of the politics of, well, you said it, I mean, kind of resenting an elite.
But I don't think that's anything wrong. I think that having a resentment for 8 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties in America being around Washington, D.C., we should be resentful of that.
Yeah.
Because what does D.C. produce?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a reason I don't know if that's a reason to be resentful. I'm just personally, my demeanor is I'm very cautious to use the term resentment. I don't like to feel resentment myself, and I always wonder if there's more to a story. My issue with populism, generally speaking, is when it gets it wrong and oversimplifies things. I think that's my biggest complaint with it, is that it's almost always an oversimplification, and I just think that our American political discourse would generally be better off with a heck of a lot more nuance.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, you're a student of nuance. That's never going to happen.
Yes, come on, man.
So you're a Platonian idealist if you think that we're going to get back to. I mean, is there a community out there that listens to your interview with Joe Rogan for 3.5 hours and really learns from it? Completely. Yeah. But there's also a greater portion of the country that is somewhat semi-involved in politics, but they just consider it to be messy and hard to understand. Right. But they see something that isn't right, and I actually think most of them are right. Yeah. Meaning, I think their gut instinct is true, where they just see their wages flatlining. They see their purchasing power disappearing. They see D.C. continually just building unbelievable kingdoms and structures in Fairfax County and Loudoun County and in Bethesda, Maryland, and their incomes have been uninterrupted and their wealth has been uninterrupted. And I look at the wealthiest counties that used to be in America around Chicago, Philadelphia, and Detroit, and we've now centered that wealth creation around D.C. And I think that there's understandable resentment and rebellion to that.
Yeah, I guess one reason too, I'm just skeptical of it in general, because I mean, I hear those complaints and then I see what DC is actually like. I just got there, so I don't, I certainly don't. What I notice is this: what it creates is this real resentment of your representatives, no matter who they are, even if they're me, right? I'm like, I just got there. I don't know why people are wealthy in DC. There's a million reasons for that, I suppose. It just the way people are wealthy all over America. I'm not exactly sure why it is. What it creates is a bit of an unhealthy resentment. I guess that's my issue with it. And so I always find myself in this weird position where I'm like, I'm not trying to defend the status quo, but I am trying to defend it a little bit, because I'm like, your complaints and frustrations might be justified, but you might be pointing at the wrong sources of the problem. It's also issue dependent.
Yeah, and I think that's a respectable viewpoint. And understand, when you take that office, you are assuming a lifetime of political betrayal, baggage, right? Like, all of a sudden, you're taking in the second congressional district in Texas, all of the sins and all of the missteps of that individual. Yeah. All of a sudden, you are now the figurehead. I will say the only difference, you're right, a lot of people are wealthy in America. The difference with D.C. is they're the only one that gets rich at gunpoint. They're the only place in America where they can forcibly take money away from you, and you can't say no, or else you go to jail. Like, for example, when Midland, Texas gets rich, They're doing it voluntarily. They're selling something the country needs. When Minnesota gets rich, whether it be Best Buy or any of their great companies, 3M, people are voluntarily cooperating. And that's where a lot of the resentment is why would 8 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties be around there? Is it because they're smarter? No.
Right.
Is it because they have more ingenuity? No. Innovation? No.
Well, the problem...
It's the proximity to the power source.
Yeah, well, but again, the problem with populism, though, is that the result isn't less government. The result's actually more government because the same populist outcry basically calls for more benefits, which calls for a growing of
maybe,
that DC.
And that's why
so it's very conflicting.
But you know my philosophical charter, right? I'm a populist that wants less government.
Yeah, no, I think you generally are actually consistent about the policies you want. The problem is that populist resentment. It appears to me to be resulting in the opposite kind of policies that you and I would be
I think that is
for.
a very fair skepticism to have towards populism. And
well, thank you.
Honestly,
I just kind of developed it as we were talking about it. It's this isn't something I've really dove into, but to hear you talk about it, and I think that will become my skepticism from now on.
Yeah, but I think that, look, to say that this could lead to a gateway of let's grow government because we have the support to do it.
Right.
That doesn't make it right.
So I want to talk to you too about one of the books, Campus Battlefield.
Yes.
You've been on campuses so much. Have you seen any improvements? Have you seen one thing I got from the Coddling of the American Mind was that because they do a sort of, just as Jonathan Haidt's book, it is kind of a psychological deep dive into campus life, and he's mostly focused on Gen Z and that culture of safetyism and microaggressions and this sort of like always trust your feelings kind of mentality, and all of the problems he noted with that. You're like a young millennial. You're close to Gen Z. You almost got a foot in each generation.
I'm throttling between the two.
And you've been on campuses for a very long time doing this kind of thing. So one thing they note is that it's mostly the elite coastal institutions where this stuff really manifests. Do you agree with that? Do you see a lot of hope on some campuses, whereas others they're like they're protesting you? And
I mean, I probably spoke at more campuses than anyone in the conservative world in the last 2 years. Everywhere from Brown to Stanford to UCLA to University of Florida, all across the country. I've seen and heard it all. The virus of leftism is in every school. So the fact that it's only elitist schools that's manifesting this mob victimhood, anti-American, anti-Western civilization, anti-Christian behavior is just not correct. Is it worse there? Absolutely. The worst visit I've ever had is Brown University.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so out of what we would consider to be the United States of America. I thought I was stepping foot into a completely different country where the nastiness, the venom towards everything that we hold near and dear, it wasn't just that we disagree with you, it's that we are going to make sure you don't speak here.
Yeah.
That was worse than even what it was at Stanford or UCLA. With that being said, I do see a lot of hope because I think that the leftist activists are decreasing in number but increasing in volume.
Yeah.
So I think there's less of them. They're just louder than ever before.
Because I'm also hoping there's just a huge majority of college kids when they see what's going on, they're just like, I just want to go to my next party. I don't care.
Yeah, and I actually support that. I don't support the partying aspect of it, but I support you should be indifferent and you should think that the people that are as activists all the time, there is very little utility.
It's okay to be indifferent. It's okay to not know.
Yes.
It's okay to just not know.
It's also okay to search.
Right.
It's okay to question.
Right.
It's okay to say what Descartes say, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
Think, don't act. Don't be an activist is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Don't just take the poster that says fossil fuels are awful. Go look into it.
Look into it. Yeah. Don't, because as soon as you choose a side, I give this advice to kids all the time. As soon as you choose a side, there's an emotional attachment that occurs, and it's devastating to your psyche when somebody proves it wrong or argues with you, and you're not prepared for it.
Your identity gets crushed.
Yeah, it is crushing, and so this is why I'm sort of thankful. Like I didn't get into the politics until a very late age, so I had a lot of intellectual backing before I got there. I was that person who basically just said, I don't know. I spent a lot of years just saying, I'm not really sure. And that's okay. There's no shame in that. There's a lot of shame in having a very strong opinion when you really don't know.
Well, and this is how I tell people that have no idea what they want to do politically, and they listen to my show and they like what I have to say, or they're not aware. They say, Charlie, how do I find out? I say, take a piece of paper and list values that mean the most to you. It could be hard work. It could be honesty. It could be commitment to truth. It could be whatever it is, right? It could be equity. It could be forgiveness. Find on one piece of paper, then go on a deep dive and find out what ethical system and what political system best represents those.
Yeah.
And that exercise alone, I think, will create more conservatives. I really do.
Yeah.
Because some people think that conservatives are only for protecting the rich few and the well-connected. They think we only care about restricting women's freedom to their bodies, which is silly and backwards and just not true. And so I think there's so much misinterpretation there. And we as conservatives and what we're doing at Turning Point USA and what you've done when you speak at us, we're actually playing offense. Like, no, we don't believe that. We're going to tell you what you believe, and then we're going to tell us what we believe.
Yeah. No, we always do find ourselves on defense, just in general as conservatives.
As a rule.
And I think because the left is very good at moving goalposts around and like taking it to a level that we just didn't think was possible, and so we have to basically take a step back, think about what our arguments are going to be on this one, because we didn't think we'd ever have this argument. Like I never thought I'd have to defend that. No, President Trump didn't kill over 50,000 people from the coronavirus. I mean, come on, guys.
And if I can, something that I never thought I would have to defend, that I had to do a whole deep dive on, and I just did, is when people say, no, America really belongs to Mexico. It's like a whole, no, seriously.
Yeah, and you're like, what?
No, but seriously, I mean, I
know, I've heard that too. Yeah.
But I get it all the time when I go to campus. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to go study the history of the annexation of Texas.
Right,
and
exactly, because you're caught flat-footed because you're like, where did you guys even come up with this? And, yeah, sure, did Texas used to be part of Mexico? Yes, but just like everything in world history, like borders change. Okay, there's a tyrannical government under Santa Anna, Battle of Gonzales, Texans rebelled. Like, so, Texas became its own country.
Now I'm fluent in it, right?
Right. But it's, of course this happened. Yeah, is there... come on, guys. Like exactly. You just never know where they're going to go with it, and so this is why I always tell people you've got to be more prepared as a conservative. You just do, you just do, and also just if you didn't know it at that moment, just be like, you know what, I'm not sure. Let me look into that. It seems a little ridiculous.
That's
but the more
okay
you learn,
to say that,
the more you learn, the better prepared you are.
It's okay to punt. It's okay. I say this sometimes. When someone came up to me, they said, Charlie, what do you have to say about the FBI putting crack cocaine in black communities to try to make them permanently poor in the 70s and 80s? I said, I've never heard that before, but I'll have to get back to you.
Right.
And that's okay.
Well, it's like, remember you and I were big targets of those weird guys who called themselves the gropers. And is that how you pronounce it? I can't remember. They're a bunch of losers who are vehemently anti-Semitic. And what I remember, like they would bring stuff up that I'd be like, what are you talking about?
It's awfully niche stuff.
Yeah.
And look, it's a very important thing. Some of those people that were the leaders absolutely hate Jews and they hate Israel and they should be completely and totally condemned and repudiated. Some of the people that were just following them don't hold those views, and I think they could be converted to pro-American, very sensible viewpoints. And when we get confronted with this stuff on campus, it's you kind of out of nowhere, you're like, ask me about this or this data point. You're like, what are you talking about? And again, now we're awfully fluent in that, and we're much more prepared to be able to handle that.
And so a couple other things you bring up in your book, you quote JFK a lot. And I think I think people would argue that these days it would be hard to place him as a Democrat. Also, I think one of his quotes is still one of the most important quotes for American culture. It's not really politics. It's more of a cultural statement, which is, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's a very important cultural underpinning. I wonder if we're losing it. Do you see us losing it? I mean, again, you deal with the next generation more than anybody. Is it fair to call a younger generation entitled? Because it's what you hear. That's the criticism you hear a lot. Is that really fair?
Are there entitled human beings that are in my generation? Absolutely. Yeah. Are there a lot of them? Yes. Are all of my generation entitled? Absolutely not. No. Yeah. That's not fair. But there's a lot of them, no doubt. Do I think there's more than the generation prior? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I think they're a majority? Remains to be seen. We don't know that. Look, JFK was a very interesting president. He obviously didn't serve out his entire term, argued for tax cuts, was very big on aspirational national ambition, right? Trying to achieve something we didn't. Bitter anti-communist, despite being a Democrat. Tried to reform the central bank. He was obviously he went to Berlin and basically to the communists gave a big middle finger and was like, "Ich bin ein Berliner," like we are all people of Berlin, right? It doesn't matter what the Marxists or the communists or Soviets say. Which I don't think that's enough respect in kind of the geopolitical history of the 1960s and 70s. there's a lot of stuff in his personal life that is completely indefensible, and we don't have to get into that. There's some stuff I disagree with in his presidency. I think he started this misinterpretation that says we're a nation of immigrants, and I think that's totally misinterpreted. I think it's way more fair to say that we were originally founded by a nation of settlers and creators, and that immigrants have helped the country. I think just saying we're all immigrants, I think, is not totally fair. I did a whole podcast on that. But to go back to your question, do you think we're losing that? Yeah, I think we do. I think that what keeps me up at night is that, especially in this term of national crisis, since when do we get a country where we have to look to government to literally tell us when we can leave our house?
It's crazy. I mean,
it's wrong.
it's
crazy.
Dangerous. But what I keep reminding people, I'm like, just by the way, guys, even if government unrestricted everything, you still have a choice whether you go into a restaurant or not.
You don't have to leave your home.
No one is making you.
There were people. There's a term called agoraphobia. Agoraphobia means the fear of leaving your home. Like, there's people a significant community of individuals in America that never leave their home.
Right.
And I'm not value judging them. I'm not saying that they're better or worse. If we reopen America, you can stay there until you think it's safe to get out.
Right.
What we are saying right now is that all liberty and freedom comes at a cost. All of it.
And also, I just want it to be science-based. I mean, we don't have to get too deep into the coronavirus debate, but I think as more data comes out and we understand how this virus spreads more and how well prepared our hospitals are at this point, like, guys, we can't be relying on the same, I think, critical thinking or reasoning that we were a couple months ago. It's just a different situation now. And not everybody, New York is a different situation too, and just like New Jersey is versus the rest of the country. And it's you got to remind people, like, you know that you have the tools. You have the tools to risk mitigate. You have the tools to wear a mask and not touch each other. Like, there is a new normal, but we can also get back to a sense of normalcy.
But the normal must always be liberty. I mean, we have so many things in our society that we don't question that have high costs. 80-mile-an-hour speed limits. 50,000 people die a year on the road. We could go to 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and we would save tens of thousands of lives a day. You would have a revolt.
But if somebody disagreed with you, you could call them a killer.
Well, right? Or they could ride their bike.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to get an automobile. There's no federal law that says you have to drive. Does not exist.
Yeah. There's no.
We allow saturated fats. We allow McDonald's, Arby's, and Wendy's to keep serving, despite we know that there's a direct correlation between the continual diet of eating these sorts of foods, but we think that liberty is worth it. I think you should have the freedom to do that. I think you have the freedom to consume alcohol, despite alcohol being the predominant reason why we have spousal abuse, domestic abuse, and other. I'm not saying all alcohol leads to that, but there is enormous scientific data to show that alcohol does have secondary and tertiary negative implications. But I'm not advocating for that because we know liberty comes at a cost. Last one is this. Every time that there's a school shooting, every single time, we as conservatives go out and we say that is awful, but the liberty of having a firearm supersedes the cost of getting rid of all of them. And so all of a sudden we've lost all of our arguments around liberty, not you and I, but generally we just said, well, you got to stay at home until it's safe. Yeah. That means never.
Right. And again, I won't argue against the initial basis for it, but I just think the public got misinformed on this, and we were told that you've got to implement some lockdowns in order to save our hospital system, and then we went from that, it seemed like, to now we got to do lockdowns until the virus is gone. But guys, it's a virus. It's not.
It's not a hurricane.
Right. You can't treat it like a hurricane.
Like it's going to be gone next week. No, the virus will still be here.
Yeah.
And again, I agree with them. The public was misled. So the original argument for lockdowns is hospital capacity. But not every portion of the state would have had hospital capacity issues. Of the country would have had a cost. New York, I get that. Yeah. Nursing homes really get that.
Well, I also think they just didn't know what they were. I'm going to give everybody a little bit of grace here and say we just didn't have the information that I think we have now. So
I'm not as gracious as you are because we did have the Grand Princess cruise line, which that data has ended up being true. And I think before we would have went to full throttle lockdown, we should have measured our way there, saying, okay, no big public gatherings, right? Micro-targeted lockdowns and quarantines.
Right.
And I would have loved to have seen a narrative embraced by governors saying liberty is a non-negotiable value in our country.
I just want them to give guidelines that don't involve punishments. I think that's a very simple standard to have.
I think that's very fair.
That's a very simple standard to have. When you're looking across the country and you're seeing everybody resist and get out into the streets and storm the Capitol.
And I love seeing that, by the way. It's uniquely American.
What you're seeing is they're not, but you don't see that in some states that still have lockdowns. But here's the difference. Those states tried to implement laws that people could sense were not respectable laws. Like telling somebody they can't kayak on the beach, we know that doesn't make any sense. Just based on the science of the virus, we know that doesn't make any sense. Like you can't tell us not to do that. In Michigan, when they're sectioning off parts of the store, saying you can't buy gardening supplies, people know. Like, wait a second, I can go in the store, but I can't buy that from the store because you think I'm going to use it and be outside around no one else.
But that's my argument for populism, right?
It's absurd.
Is that people do have a natural built-in right and wrong compass meter.
Yeah, I don't know if that's connected to populism.
No, I'm just trying to tie back why I believe it. I'm not saying you have to, but you're right. When Governor Whitmer says you can't go to your second home, why? Because that has coronavirus in it? Why can't I go to my second home in Petoskey?
Wait, really?
Governor Whitmer literally said one of her
rules.
Measures was like, you can't go to your second home in Michigan. Like, wait a second. So you're trying to tell me
that would be a better place to go.
In fact, it would be ideal
theory.
because it would be in the UP, in the Upper Peninsula, which I know super well, or Mackinac Island or Petoskey or Lake Walloon, where there's...
Oh, you know Mackinac Island, huh?
Well, I've never been there.
Such an elitist.
You've probably been there for some congressional retreat, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have cars unless the vice
president... so you know they don't have cars.
Yeah.
You seem to know a lot about this.
Well, and this is why I have such resentment for the ruling class, because I've dined among them. But no, all kidding aside, why not? It would be the perfect place to be able to do that.
Oh, it's ridiculous. This is a fundamental truth about laws. So for them to be respected, they must be respectable, and for them to be respectable, they have to be based on some absolute truth. And this is the argument for the understanding of where our laws come from, the Judeo-Christian history, the definition of morality, and the definitions of justice. Again, like we talked about that on your podcast.
Yeah, you had the Jonathan Haidt.
We went into a
which is not unique to him.
Just for my listeners, you have to listen to the
Please
other
go
podcast
and subscribe.
I just did with Charlie. Yeah, on his podcast,
Charlie Kirk Show.
We had a very good philosophical discussion on a lot of things, but one of them being like, listen, there's a rational way to define justice, and there's an irrational way to constantly move the goalposts on justice. And people do have an intrinsic sense of that. I think that is true. I think from a young age, kids, toddlers, they understand, like, wait a second, you're going to give my brother the same amount of reward even though I did twice as many chores? Why?
And no one taught them to have that kind of moral referee in them.
It's natural.
It was intrinsic. It's also natural for them to manipulate their parents. Yeah. No one taught them to go turn mom against dad. No one taught them to go steal $5 out of their purse. So I think that conflict of good versus evil that we see in every story of Western society.
And we talked about that in our other podcast too, about human nature, and their good versus evil debate is within all humans. You can't change that.
The left won't agree that.
No, the
left would say no. They're stealing the $5 because the system you built around them makes the $5.
Yes,
and they have to steal it to survive.
How is that? How is it the system's fault? It's the corrupt institutions' fault. Therefore, if we give our more benevolent institutions more power, we can therefore make human nature better. That's an important philosophical distinction, I think, in between how the left and the right think. And maybe with that high-minded ending, we go ahead and conclude, because I don't know how long we've been talking.
It's good. So if they want to check out the book Magga Doctrine, they can go to tpusa.com to get involved with Turning Point USA.
It's Magga
Doctrine, or subscribe to the Charlie Kirk Show. Type it into